Daniel Whitfield had walked past 1,000 strangers on 1,000 cold nights without breaking stride. This one stopped him cold. It was 19 degrees outside, the kind of cold that turns breath into visible clouds and makes every gust feel personal. Daniel was crossing the parking garage after a board meeting that had run 3 hours over schedule, his mind still tangled in quarterly projections, when a small voice cut through the wind behind him. "Sir, my baby sister is freezing. Can you help us?" He turned. A boy, no older than 8, stood at the edge of a covered bus stop, shivering so hard his teeth chattered audibly, arms wrapped around a bundle that, on closer look, was an infant swaddled in a blanket too thin to matter against weather like this. Time seemed to stand still in that garage entrance. Daniel had built a $40 million logistics company by making fast, decisive calls under pressure. He had never once frozen in the middle of a decision. He froze now. To understand why those 9 words landed the way they did, you have to understand the man standing in that parking garage. Daniel was 44 years old, divorced for 3 years, and estranged from his 16-year-old son, Ethan, in the particular quiet way that happens not through a single explosion, but through 1,000 missed dinners and canceled weekends. He had built Whitfield Logistics from a single warehouse lease into a company employing over 600 people, and in doing so, had become extraordinarily skilled at solving problems that could be solved with a wire transfer and a phone call. His first instinct, standing in front of that shivering boy, was almost exactly that. Reach for his wallet, hand over whatever cash he was carrying, and keep walking toward his car, where the heater and a quiet 40-minute drive home were waiting. It was the boy's exact phrasing that stopped him. Not, "Can you spare some change?" or "Can you help me?" but something specific, urgent, entirely without performance. "My baby sister is freezing." A sentence built for one purpose only, to get a stranger's attention long enough to save a life. Daniel put his wallet back in his pocket and crouched down instead. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, already shrugging out of his overcoat. "Marcus," the boy said. "I'm 8. This is Ava. She's 4 months old." Daniel wrapped his coat around both children in one motion, tucking the fabric around the infant's exposed hands. "Where's your mom, Marcus? Where's the adult who's supposed to be with you?" Marcus's composure cracked slightly. "She's at work. The diner on 5th. She works nights. Mrs. Delgado next door was supposed to watch us, but she never came, and Mom doesn't know, and I didn't know what else to do. So I brought Ava outside because I thought if anybody saw us, maybe—" He stopped, embarrassed, like he'd said too much. Daniel did the math quickly. Marcus had been alone with an infant for over 3 hours, in an apartment with no adult supervision, in weather cold enough to be genuinely dangerous, because a child care arrangement had silently failed, without anyone realizing it in time. "You did exactly the right thing," Daniel said, and meant it completely. "You're not in trouble. Neither is Ava. Let's get you both warm." Daniel led both children to his car, running the heater at full blast within seconds of getting them inside. But what he did next mattered more than the coat, more than the warmth, more than any single gesture of kindness in isolation. He called 911, then at the dispatcher's direction, connected with the local Child Protective Services emergency line, the responsible, unglamorous, correct first step, rather than driving off with 2 children who weren't his, however good his intentions. "I want to be very clear," he told the dispatcher. "I'm a stranger to these kids. I found them at a bus stop. I need someone from CPS and possibly police to meet me here, and I need to know these children are safe and accounted for the right way." He stayed in the warm car with Marcus and Ava for the next 40 minutes, keeping the boy talking about school, about his favorite cartoon, about anything except the cold, buying Marcus the one thing every child in crisis needs most and rarely gets: an adult who doesn't disappear. When the caseworker arrived, a steady, unhurried woman named Patricia Yu, She reviewed the family's file on a tablet in the front seat of her car while Daniel waited nearby. No prior neglect. Complaints, she confirmed quietly. Mother is Renata Sanchez, 26 years old, single parent since her partner's incarceration 8 months ago. She works 2 jobs. This looks like an isolated, dangerous child care failure, not a pattern. The specifics assembled themselves quickly. Renata worked the dinner and overnight shift at a diner 2 miles away, earning $11.50 an hour, relying on an informal, unpaid arrangement with a neighbor because licensed child care in the area cost more per week than she earned in 3 days of work. The neighbor, it would later turn out, had suffered a medical emergency of her own that evening and hadn't been able to call. She has no idea anything's gone wrong, Patricia said. She thinks her kids are safe right now, 3 miles away. Daniel insisted on coming along when Patricia drove to the diner to notify Renata, not out of obligation, but because he couldn't shake the image of a mother about to have the worst moment of her year, delivered by a stranger with a clipboard. Renata was refilling ketchup bottles when Patricia approached. The moment she saw the CPS badge, her face drained of color, and when she learned her children had been found alone at a bus stop in freezing weather, she collapsed against the counter, a sound escaping her that was somewhere between a sob and a scream. I called Mrs. Delgado every 20 minutes on my breaks, she said, hands shaking as she pulled out her phone to show the call log, 9 missed connection attempts over 3 hours. She never answered. I thought everything was fine. I thought... Her trembling voice carried years of silent heartbreak, the kind that comes from a parent doing everything humanly possible and still finding herself one broken link away from disaster. Daniel stepped forward. Your kids are safe. Marcus is remarkable. He got Ava somewhere warm and asked a stranger for help instead of panicking. You raised a boy who knew exactly what to do in a crisis. Patricia's assessment, delivered over the following 2 days, avoided the outcome Renata feared most. Rather than removal, CPS approved a temporary in-home safety plan. The children would remain with their mother under a structured monitoring arrangement on one non-negotiable condition. Reliable licensed child care needed to be secured within 30 days. It should have been a relief. Instead, it became its own kind of crisis. Licensed in-home child care in Renata's area ran roughly $280 a week, more than a quarter of her total income from both jobs combined. The system had correctly identified the danger and offered a solution Renata had no realistic way to afford. I don't know how I make this work, she admitted to Patricia, staring at a compliance timeline that felt, despite everyone's good intentions, like a countdown to losing her children over a problem that had nothing to do with how much she loved them. Daniel had followed the case closely enough by then that when he learned about the child care requirement, he didn't hesitate. Through Whitfield Logistics Community Outreach Division, a modest program that had mostly funded local food banks, he arranged full sponsorship of a licensed in-home child care provider for Renata's family for 1 full year, at a value of roughly $14,500. Then he did something even Patricia hadn't anticipated. He offered Renata an administrative coordinator position at his own company at $19 an hour with benefits, nearly double her diner wage, with hours that would actually allow her to be home in the evenings. You don't have to do this, Renata said, echoing what strangers in 100 similar stories had said before her. I know, Daniel said, but I want to. There's more to why than you'd guess. The deeper reasons surfaced slowly over the weeks that followed, in fragments Daniel had never spoken aloud to anyone. When Daniel was 9 years old, his own mother had been forced into a similar impossible bind, a last-minute shift change with no backup childcare, leaving Daniel alone overnight far longer than any responsible plan allowed. A neighbor had noticed, made a quiet call not to authorities, but simply to Daniel's mother's workplace, and covered for the family just long enough to prevent the situation from becoming an official case at all. Someone made one phone call, Daniel told Patricia much later, and it kept my family together instead of tearing it apart over one bad night that wasn't my mother's fault. I never told anyone that story. Not my ex-wife, not my own son. He paused. Marcus said almost the exact words I used to rehearse in my head as a kid, hoping someone would notice before anything went wrong. It wasn't charity that moved him at the bus stop. It was recognition. 3 weeks later, Marcus showed up at Daniel's office, escorted by Renata, coat freshly dry cleaned, folded carefully over both arms, like a ceremonial offering. "I wanted to give this back," Marcus said solemnly. "It's really expensive. It wasn't right for me to keep it." Daniel crouched down, the same way he had at the bus stop. "Some things aren't meant to be returned, Marcus. Some things are meant to be kept, so you remember exactly what you're capable of on your worst night." He folded the boy's hands back around the coat. "You saved your sister, not me. Me. You just gave a chance to help." Marcus held the coat like it suddenly weighed differently than it had a moment before. Over the following year, the ripple effects extended further than anyone at that bus stop could have predicted. Renata thrived in her new role, eventually promoted to a full coordinator position with a raise to $24 an hour. Marcus became a familiar face at Whitfield Logistics' quarterly family appreciation days, proudly introducing Ava, now walking, to anyone who'd listen. And Daniel, who had spent 3 years avoiding the harder work of repairing his relationship with his own son, found himself calling Ethan more often, showing up unannounced with an apology he'd rehearsed a dozen times and delivered clumsily anyway. Watching an 8-year-old shoulder responsibility no child should have to carry, and then watching that same child slowly allow himself to simply be 8 again, once an adult finally stayed, had taught Daniel something about presence that no board meeting ever could. "I don't want you to need a bus stop miracle to know I'm paying attention," he told Ethan, the first time his son agreed to dinner in over a year. "I just want to actually show up." By the following winter, the coat Daniel had given Marcus no longer fit him. Kids that age grow fast. But Marcus kept it folded in his closet anyway, a strange, oversized artifact of the night everything changed. Renata's apartment, once a place defined by anxious math and unreliable arrangements, now had a steady rhythm to it. Licensed childcare in the mornings, a job that let her be home by dinner, a son who no longer had to carry more than an 8-year-old should. When Patricia closed out Renata's case file for good, marking it resolved with no further concerns, she added a note that wasn't standard procedure, but felt necessary anyway. That the outcome hinged less on any single agency's intervention than on one stranger choosing to stay in a cold parking garage a few minutes longer than convenience required. Most of these cases don't get a happy ending because nobody stepped in wrong, she reflected. They get one because, for once, somebody stepped in right. Call the right people. Stay until help arrives. Follow through after the crisis ends, instead of walking away once the cameras, so to speak, stopped rolling. On the 1-year anniversary of that freezing night, Daniel, Renata, Marcus, Ava, and, for the first time in longer than either could clearly remember, Ethan, gathered for dinner at the same diner where Renata used to work nights. Marcus, now 9, told the story to Ethan with the exaggerated confidence of a boy who'd earned the right to a good story. Ethan listened, genuinely, the way Daniel hadn't seen his son listen to anyone in years. "You really just walked up to a stranger like that?" Ethan asked Marcus, half in disbelief. "I didn't have a choice," Marcus said simply. "Ava needed help. I just had to ask the right way." It would be easy to remember this story as one about a wealthy man's generosity toward a struggling family. But the truth sits somewhere more precise than that. Real rescue rarely looks like charity. It looks like someone choosing to stay a few extra minutes in freezing weather instead of reaching for their wallet and walking on. It looks like calling the right people instead of taking matters into your own hands. It looks like an 8-year-old boy finding the exact right 9 words to say, and a stranger deciding, for once, not to keep walking past them. Somewhere in a warm apartment tonight, a boy who once stood shivering at a bus stop is simply being a kid again. And that, more than any dollar amount or headline, is the whole point of the story.